So imagine the scene. Your adventurers are walking through a forest when you're confronted by a hideously dark and foreboding tree. Are those just vines or tendrils hanging down from the trees? Or is it the noose that signals your impending death? Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries with John and Hannah.
Hi.
And today we're going to be looking at the Hangman Tree. Okay, so as we said before the introduction, as per the result of our Twitter poll, we're going to be looking at the Hangman Tree. Now, I've only been able to find a mention of this in a couple of books, those being the first edition AD&D Monster Manual 2 and the second ed AD&D Monster Manual. Obviously, if you know of any more mentions of it or you've got any more information, please feel free to call in and leave us a voicemail. So, look, I can see you've got the first ed AD&D Monster Manual 2 there. So what does it say about the Hangman Tree in there?
So it says it's named for the rope-like appendages, which are sinewy vines that vaguely resemble nooses.
Okay.
And drop down much to appear as if they were hanging ropes.
Okay.
So if you know what you're looking for, it's not going to be all that difficult to spot. It's a deciduous tree, it's got a shallow root system, and it traps its prey.
Okay.
We've got a very long, convoluted description about how it works in combat.
Yeah, I think essentially that boils down to that when it senses movement close by, it drops down a noose and attempts to lift its prey up. Once a noose is around the prey, it constricts, causing 1 to 3 points of damage around. And you have to do 13 to 20 points of damage, I think it is, to sever the noose as it's dragging you up.
And it takes 4 rounds for it to lift you up above the trunk and drop you into the centre of the trunk, which is listed as the trunk's stomach, and says it's nearly impossible to escape from due to the sharp growths. And while in the stomach, you'll suffer 3 to 12 points of acid damage per round, so 3d4, which is pretty brutal. So it's actually more like a pitcher plant than a tree.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, obviously we know pitcher plants, they sort of lure insects into them and then they dissolve them in this sort of stomach acid, for want of a better term.
Mm-hmm. With these added appendages that it can use to actually snare you. It says it has this hallucinatory perfume which it can release, usually when there's prey within 30 to 80 feet, which causes you to believe that the tree is some sort of ordinary quickwood or treant, etc. Haltingly in common, that it's learned over many years. I assume it just repeats things that previous people have said when they've been nearby.
I would assume so. I mean, I know it's an intelligent plant, but it doesn't really specify how intelligent it is.
Yeah, it lists it as low intelligence.
Yeah, so I'd assume you're right, love. It's probably just repeating phrases it's heard.
Like the predator.
Yeah, exactly. Just stuff to try and draw its prey near.
Mm-hmm. Extreme cold will shock the tree into dormancy until it thaws out. Well, that makes sense with it being a deciduous tree.
Yeah, exactly.
Has magic resistance based on its age, but lightning or electric will cause double damage if used to attack the tree, which also makes sense.
With it being a tree, yeah.
It usually looks like a thick oak tree with few branches and sparse foliage. There are knot-like protuberances where the sensory organs usually are, high on the trunk, and the lower trunk will show a scar-like place for the expulsion of indigestibles.
So bits of metal and armour and stuff like that.
So there you are walking through the woods and there's this creepy old tree, but there's a bit of armour in it. Hey, that looks shiny.
Yeah.
I can see so many adventurers getting pulled in.
Like you say, if it grabs an adventure and it's expelling these gems and armour and coins and whatever that it can't digest, and presumably they're going to have been a bit worn away by the stomach acid, so they'll be nice and shiny.
And then we've got one of my favourite errors in this book that I've noticed so far, We have the optional guide for tree ages, which was obviously supposed to have variant hit dice on it, but it doesn't. It just lists how old the trees are.
Right. Well, let's head over to the AD&D Second Ed Monster Manual. Now, we just get a section called Intelligent Plants in this, and it sort of lumps a load of different stuff together.
Yeah, there's about 20 things in there.
Yeah, and that covers like your shambling mounds, your strangleweed, stuff like that. It's pretty similar in terms of the stats, to be perfectly
Some
honest.
of the descriptions, word for word, the same.
Yeah, it's pretty similar. We do get some additional details, on how difficult it is to like break out of being inside the tree, and it pretty much says it's nearly impossible, to be honest. But I presume if the creature was killed while the person was still alive, you could break them out, etc. They get the magic resistance is, according to this, 5% per decade the tree has been alive. And in this one, we actually do get some guidelines about how the age of the tree affects the hit dice.
They've remembered to put the hit dice on it this time.
Yeah, so we're told that like 0 to 4 years, it's a non-combat sprout with like 1 hit point. If up all the way up to an ancient tree, which will have 8 hit points per hit dice, and it gives you the breakdown of like how many hit dice the various like categories have. And that's pretty much all the additional information in the AD&D Second Edition Monster Manual too.
Although this time we do get a drawing of it as well.
Yeah.
And it is pretty much what I was imagining from the description in the first ed, but it's also one of the few creatures that doesn't actually get a drawing in the first ed.
Yeah, I mean, I presume they were trying to save space, and they were like, it's a tree with news hanging down from it. And that's pretty much what you get in the picture in the Monster Manual for Second Ed. It's this vaguely sort of oak-looking tree with a couple of these knotty-like nodules, which are presumably eyes, and this big slit at the top where they drop things into to digest them, and these sort of ropey nooses hanging down amidst more normal-looking foliage, which is presumably there as a form of camouflage and for all the things that plants normally use their leaves for. So that's pretty much it in terms of what the books say. To be honest, there's not a great deal on it. It seems to me it's very much designed, again, like on one of these sort of like gotcha monsters. You're having some sort of nature ramble, you're exploring a forest or whatever, you want something different to the normal like goblins or sort of woodland creatures jumping out. You can have one of these sort of intelligent plants, this Hangman Tree in there. And as we said, if it's digested adventurers or stuff like that, it's probably going to have at least a small pile of like metal, coins, gems, probably nice and shiny because of the stomach juices that have been dissolving the outer layer of it. And some player's going to go, oh, pile of gemstones at the bottom of the tree, let's go for that. That's when the noose comes down, grabs them, tries to hoik them up into the mouth of the tree. So it makes sense from the perspective of the tree that not only is it expelling this stuff it can't digest, but also, again, it's acting as a lure to potential prey, because although it can move, it moves really, really, really slowly. So it's a more efficient way to get prey, to like bring prey to it and get it within range of the nooses, and then whoop, and up you go.
Yeah.
So
obviously that's how you could use it as a random encounter monster.
Yeah.
But what if you were going to make it sort of the focal monster in a campaign?
Okay, well, if I was going to use it as the focal point of a campaign, like you say, you can use it as is, just if you want just like a random encounter or a little bit of like a random combat in a woodland environment. However, I don't think, as they are, they work particularly well as like the sort of payoff for like a bigger adventure. Because let's face it, if you like slog your way through an adventure, you get to confront the final foe, and it's a tree that can strangle you with ropes, it's probably going to be a little bit underwhelming if you just present it as is, where it's just a natural tree with like a weird way of catching its prey. However, I think if you want to make more of it, as we've said many times, you can easily reskin this creature, and you don't need to change how it looks, you don't need to change any of the stats. All you need to do is give it a bit of background and a little something to explain it. And my first thought would be, instead of just having it as a normal tree, have it so that it was a normal tree to start off with, but something has happened to it which has transformed it into this twisted sort of predatory tree that now sort of like drains the life and the souls out of people. And you know me, I like my sort of dark horror stuff in role-playing games. So the first thing that springs to my mind with this is we're all aware that in sort of villages in medieval times and whatever, they did have regular areas where like criminals and people like that were executed. And one way for them to do that would be to hang them from a nearby tree, because all you need is a rope and the big tree, and you're done. There's no elaborate preparations required. I can certainly see if maybe perhaps just over the years with all these many people being hung there, and perhaps they don't even do it anymore, it could just be a forgotten legend, but maybe so many people were hung from this tree that sort of the sort of evil of that act, or the death agonies of the people who were involved, has sort of seeped into the tree, and it's changed it over time. So now it's like hungering for more victims to be hung. Or you could have perhaps someone was wrongly hung there. I don't know, maybe to go back to what we're talking about with hags previously in an episode, maybe someone was wrongly accused of being a witch and they were hung from the tree, and they sort of their death agonies and the sort of wrongdoing caused the tree to adapt in this way. Or perhaps the person was a witch, whether they were evil or good. If they were evil, maybe they laid down a curse on the village, you know, as they were dying. Or even if they were good, perhaps they were like a herbalist or something and they genuinely were trying to help out the village. Perhaps, again, they laid down a curse. I mean, how many films have you seen where, like, someone dies, they lay down a curse upon whoever's killed them, and it comes back in some sort of unusual way? And then once you've sort of done something like that, you need to think about, as with any scenario, you need to think about how do we get the player characters involved in this? Because if it's just a local legend in, like, a village in the middle of nowhere, there's no reason for your players to get involved. However, what if something has happened recently that's caused the tree to become sort of range further afield looking for its victims? Maybe like there's been a cold winter and not many people have been going past, and as it started to thaw, maybe it's had to go further afield for victims.
Well, we've already got the hallucinatory effect.
Yeah.
Maybe you could change that to people dreaming about the tree and wanting to go to the tree from a further distance.
Yeah, maybe, as you were saying, to build on that, maybe this hallucinatory sort of spores or perfume or whatever it is, maybe it sort of gets into people during the day. Like the tree doesn't do anything to them during the day because it doesn't want to get people out of the areas. Maybe it sort of seeps into the local farmers or whatever. Then they find themselves sleepwalking during the evening when they go to sleep and they're dreaming of the tree. Next thing you know, whoop, and they're in the tree.
Maybe some of its fruits affected the local cider.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. What if maybe it's a bit like a substance that builds up in your system. It takes a long time to, like, your system to flush it out. What if you get a little bit of this, like, this perfume, let's call it, this hallucinatory perfume in your system? Maybe it doesn't do anything if you get just like a little whiff of it as you're walking past. However, maybe recently they've started harvesting the fruits, like you say, to make cider or like fruit pies or whatever you want to do with it. And maybe after so many like years of eating it, it's built up in their system to the point where the tree can now like exert a certain amount of control over these people. And perhaps, as we've said, maybe the control's not strong enough to do it while they're conscious yet, but when they're asleep and their defences are down, they start dreaming of this tree and going to this tree. They get up, sleepwalking during the night. Next thing they know, they're in front of this tree, down comes the noose, and that's them brown bread. That's them done with. Maybe the villagers hire the player characters, if you want to go to the sort of more standard way. They might not even know that the tree's responsible. Maybe some people have just disappeared from the village, and they're like, we don't know what's going on. The player characters have to investigate. And that's when having a history built up for the tree would come in really useful, because if there's nothing for the player characters to find out, they're not going to piece it together. Whereas if they can find out this history about the tree and how it used to be used for killing these criminals and someone put the death curse on and whatever, then perhaps they can sort of start questioning the tree, and maybe when they get closer, they find some of like the remnants. Like maybe they find like maybe they find like a couple of coins from like one of the farmers who was like digested by the tree, or they find some item that sort of gives away the identity of the victims. Or maybe if they stay long enough, maybe they sort of start having dreams about the tree, because perhaps before it starts sort of like being able to like control you while you sleep. Maybe you start having the dreams a bit before that, but you just think they're dreams. So you can have a nice bit of foreshadowing where maybe the player characters are in the village for a few weeks. They're eating the food, they're drinking the drink. Of course they are. They're in a village. They need supplies. Maybe a couple of the party members not being controlled by it because they've not had enough of it yet, unlike the local villagers. But maybe they start having the odd dream about this foreboding tree and sort of going to it. When they start asking around about like the local trees, you've got the old person in the village who's like, "Oh, I remember we used to take wrong-uns up to that hill up there and execute them," and that can sort of lead them more into this scenario and give them sort of a few clues and hints. Because if you have a mystery and there's no clues, people ain't going to solve it. Simple as that. But I definitely think those are a few ways that you could adapt to this, and you change nothing. You're just adding to it.
So I had a couple of thoughts as well.
All right, cool. So why don't you tell me about the first thing that came to your mind when you looked at the monster we'd picked?
Well, there were two things, actually. The first one was the Billie Holiday song called Strange Fruit from 1950s. And obviously the D&D books were created in America, and hanging has quite different connotations there to here. I'm very much aware that we're recording this in February and half of our listeners are American.
Yes.
And stick a lampshade on that, because I very much hope that the Lovecraft Country TV series does a great story of that theme.
Yeah, I'm sure they could handle it far better than we could discuss it, not being as familiar with the subject.
Second thing that came to my mind was Lad's Grave, which is just down the road from where I grew up.
Yeah.
It's a crossroads. That's all that's there now, but there used to be a big tree there.
Okay.
And I've heard 4 or 5 different versions of who's buried there and what they may or may not have done.
Yeah.
But the story's always a kid somewhere 12, 14, that sort of age,
right,
who's done something that would now definitely not be considered a hanging crime.
Yeah.
And falls to mob justice from like people in the local area, and then gets buried at this crossroads.
Okay.
I'm sure there's hundreds of crossroads all over the UK that have similar stories about
them.
them.
Well, crossroads are very sort of like mystical places in folklore, aren't they?
And it struck me that a tree like that, as you say, has got this legend built up about it, I'd find it far more sinister for it to just be a plant that's doing its plant thing. It doesn't even need to have the magic perfume.
Yeah.
Because if you do something bad in this area, you get taken to the hanging tree, and people just stand around in a circle and keep shoving until the tree gets you.
And gets you. Yeah, so that you're suggesting that a lot of the locals know about it and they use it.
It's effectively a local execution tradition.
And obviously if you're the tree and you're intelligent, why would you move anywhere if they're bringing people to you?
And maybe it's not like the local village people. Maybe there's like some evil lord that gets off on this.
Yeah.
Maybe it's some spell that's creating this. Maybe it is, as you say, the perfume affecting people's minds, or the fruit affecting people's minds, and therefore the people in the area have effectively become the cult of the hanging tree.
Oh, that's nice. That's a catchy title.
As I say, I really hope Lovecraft Country does something of this ilk.
Yeah, I mean, I think
they're far more talented writers than I.
I think it was interesting as well that you mentioned about someone being buried near the crossroads, because there's a few stories I've read, I forget the titles now, where like a tree or a plant or something has ended up evil because their roots have sort of gone down into the body of like an evildoer, and they've sort of like with the nutrients they've taken up, they've sort of absorbed that evil or the sort of pain and suffering, and that's gone into the tree and sort of twisted it. And you could easily do that. I mean, if you want to go for the stereotypical sort of semi-Lovecraftian vibe, there's some evil wizard who got his just desserts like back in the day. He was sacrificing locals or whatever. They mobbed up, they killed him, they buried him in an unmarked grave because they're like, he's not getting like a decent burial because he's like an evil sorcerer. Then I don't know, maybe they put a tree there to mark it, or maybe like a tree's just sprouted there. Perhaps even the tree was formed from its evil, but because it's absorbed the evil of this wizard, perhaps it's trying to sort of enact their revenge upon the descendants of the local people. But obviously it's still only a tree, so it's just like doing it in the best way it possibly can.
So one other thing that crossed my mind, as I was looking at stuff about pitcher plants, and there are types of pitcher plants that frogs live in.
Yes, yeah.
Now, what if there was some kind of a creature that naturally coexisted with the hanging tree?
Oh, in like a sort of symbiotic relationship.
And therefore that creature was somehow responsible for bringing things to the tree in order to keep the tree strong, in order to keep like the colony inside the tree safe.
Yeah.
In the way that you get like ant colonies that'll defend the place that they're living.
No, I think that's a really good idea, and I think if you wanted to, I mean, you could link that with your sort of sinister cult of the hanging tree idea. Because what if somehow, I don't know how, you'd have to work this out for your own game, what if somehow the tree can recognise the local villagers, but perhaps they get a lot of advantage like from its fruit, like maybe its fruit sustains the village because there's no like farming or whatever in the area, and they do make the wines and the ciders, and they eat the fruits, and it could even have some other effect, like maybe the fruit keeps them younger for longer or keeps them healthy.
Heals wounds.
Exactly,
There's
yeah.
a load of stuff you could do with that.
And perhaps, like, at a certain point in history, this sort of cult of villagers were like, well, all we've got to do is, like, when we see the odd traveller going past every now and again, direct them to the tree will take its due, we keep getting the fruit, and it's not like it's a local, is it?
And you could really build on like a Wicker Man vibe with this as well.
Yeah, definitely.
With your adventurers come into the village and everybody's really glad to see them and really great. Or maybe even you could go with the child sacrifice element of the Wicker Man and say, oh, here's the May Queen. If the adventurers don't go, then the May Queen's going and they're going to have to watch it.
Yeah, and I mean, continuing in that Wicker Man vibe, I mean, obviously the sort of central conceit at the start of the Wicker Man, without getting into too much detail, is, you know, there's a bit where Edward Woodward sees the pictures and he's like, oh, they had great harvests on all these years, and now they've had a rubbish harvest and the person's disappeared. Maybe they've recently had like a bad harvest, maybe the tree's not bearing enough fruit, and they're like, we didn't have any visitors like the last year, so we've got to try and get someone quickly. Otherwise, we won't continue to get the benefits from the tree, and our village will collapse and we'll all be starving, etc. So maybe the villagers start sort of ranging further afield. Mm-hmm. Well, I think we've given you a few ideas there for how you could use the Hangman Tree in your game. If you've got any thoughts on this or anything else, maybe you'd like to suggest something for a future episode, you can get in touch with us in a couple of ways. You can leave a voicemail message using the SpeakPipe website, link in the description below, or you can send us an email to rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. Until we see you again, take care, stay safe, and whatever you're playing, have fun.
Bye.